What might change if artists stopped organising their lives around Western ideas of time? Our guest today is Emele Ugavule. Her work and research explores Indigenous oceanic storytelling and the ways that stories connect people across generations, cultures, and communities. In our episode today, we'll talk about creativity, time, healing, and what it means to tell stories in a digital world. Here's our conversation. Maloni, Emele, thank you so much for coming in today and joining us. Yeah, welcome.
Thank you.
You've spoken a lot before, Emele, about this concept of temporal sovereignty, and I wanted to get into it a bit. For anyone who's hearing that phrase maybe for the first time today, what does it mean?
Temporal sovereignty, from my perspective, really is about taking this concept of temporality or time and this concept of like agency and like authority and bringing them together to be able to think about how we can move, manipulate, form, layer, shape time beyond just like a Western concept of what it is across all aspects of our lives, you know?
That kind of ties nicely actually into a question I wanted to ask about how we structure time in the West. And I was thinking a lot when I first came across this term around the 9 to 5 and the Google calendars and scheduling. What burdens do you think that those Western systems and structures around time place on our artists and creatives?
When I think about burdens in relation to like Western constructs of time, I think about what it does for artists mentally and emotionally and how it creates kind of like strains on what our mental and emotional well-being is as artists. I'm a firm believer that like limitations are actually a really healthy, important thing for creativity and for artists, but there are, ways to be able to form and kind of construct what limitations look like in a way that is like healthy for creative practice, that isn't necessarily also creating unnecessary burden and stress in the way that we think of like 9 to 5s, or we think of time in relation to deadlines or calendars. It feels like there is like one really homogenous way of understanding what time is that we are all kind of like unfortunately forced to live inside. And like my hope is that people keep pushing the limits of what they understand that to be. It is kind of wild that we are prisoners inside this system that is so young. And it kind of has us in this gridlock because of the way that Western time connects us and also folds us into each other globally and internationally. Whereas what I love about time of, like here, the Mataka, of like the Vulavakaviti, where I'm from in Fiji, or the Mahina Haka Tokelauan, or the Mahina Whaka Uvea, is that it's local. It's specific to the whenua that you're on, and also like hyper-local, So the knowledge around time is very much informed by where you are. Just on the environment alone and how it has shaped the way that my people move through the world is like so incredibly expansive and boundaryless, and it gives and has given me permission to also be that way in my life. Like this concept of island time or Fiji time is something that has like historically been like weaponized against specific people as kind of like a racial slur, or just like something really negative about how we understand time. But for us as Pacific people, we, in my opinion, are masters of time, because as people who are living off the land, living off the sea, the only way to survive literally was to be able to understand when it was the right time to plant, harvest, rest, work, all of those things, to work together as a community. So the only way we have been able to survive on these very isolated islands in the biggest body of water in the world is to understand how to work with time and how to work with each other. And so island time for me is this idea that, we are incongruent with Western concepts of time, and therefore we're lazy or unorganized, or we don't know how to kind of like manage ourselves. But actually we have come from thousands of years worth of time management that is directly linked to our land and to our people. And we are trying to fit ourselves into this very young, very new kind of like global system that is not local. And the two are doing this. And I think it's excellent, actually, that they do that. I think it's important because for us, it is important to have temporal sovereignty. And part of that is what's in our blood memory, what's in our communities, and the way that we move through times.
You've spoken before, Emele, and kind of mentioned earlier about time being shaped, stretched, and layered also, which I really love this idea of being able to mold and almost bend your time. How do you think that artists can work with time differently here in the West, maybe more effectively within their practice?
One of the most obvious answers is about learning about the lunar solar calendars of where you live, understanding, for here in Aotearoa, the Mataka is really key part of that. This second key part of that I would say is about understanding how time works in your body. In 2021, I had this digital residency, which kind of set me off on this path of research around time, which I built a framework around called Denguva. And in Vosa Vakaviti, Denguva means to breathe, or Dengu means to rest.
Wow.
And basically, it was an opportunity for me to work with other dancers who work in all kinds of different disciplines, focusing on traditional Pacific performance, contemporary performance, hip hop, all these different styles, and for us to really consider what our relationship with time is. From that framework, I kind of ended up thinking about self-time, soil time, and settler time. And it gave us an opportunity to kind of measure where we felt that one of the three or two of the three might be a bit more dominant for, in our lives currently. And I find that when settler time, which is, how we measure time by minutes, by numbers, hours, days, weeks, etc., is too dominant in my life than self-time in terms of how my body measures time in relation to my cycles, my circadian rhythms, all that kind of stuff. They start to kind of do this and bump heads. And when I'm not listening to soil time, then the same thing happens with self-time. So really, I think at the crux of it is inviting and encouraging artists to think about, their relationship to time of the soil and the sky that they're under, the seas that they're in relationship to, and also time inside their bodies. Our bodies are so incredibly complex and sophisticated. It's kind of insane that we have these fleshy structures that we can walk around in and that are just on autopilot every day, and they do such wonderful, amazing things for us and are constantly healing us, and so being able to understand really what your rhythms are, where you kind of naturally have periods of great flow, and when you your body starts to kind of slow down, making sure that you have enough sunlight, making sure that you are eating at the right times, all of that stuff in terms of yourself and your body time, I feel is a really key part to being able to shape and layer and bend time. And it's so, I did say earlier that I feel it's difficult to opt out of Western time fully, but really temporal sovereignty it starts with you and understanding yourself and trying to kind of align yourself so that you can be the best version of yourself in your creative practice, in your community, in your family, and in your professional life.
Do you ever think, Emele, that time itself can become part of an artwork?
Yeah, absolutely. In the world today, where the attention economy is really driving engagement and who is telling stories and what is out there in a digital space, but also in physical kind of live performance as well. Now more than ever, time is designing the way that stories are told and who is being platformed as part of that. I think from a very industrial capitalist perspective, absolutely, time is embedded in the design of how we tell stories and how we make work. But from an artist perspective, I also, I'm really inspired by durational works. I think maybe in 2013, I went and saw Einstein on the Beach, which is this
cool.
massive, I want to say 5-hour opera.
Whoa, okay.
It might be
marathon.
Yeah. It felt 5 hours, and there was no intermission. That, just kind of absolutely blew my mind as a young NIDA student, thinking about like what is durational performance and what does that mean to be unapologetic about how much time you take, and charging people a crazy amount of money for it as well, being like, I'm gonna make you sit here for 5 hours and I'm worth 100 and whatever, however much, I think it was like 150 or something dollars for the ticket. Seeing level of like work of that caliber, that was so uncompromising in the amount of time that it asked of its audiences and their attention, I feel like was really inspiring. It is an integral part of whether or not we choose that or whether that is imposed on us as artists. But it can be really exciting when we start to kind of be intentional about how time is integral to our art and our creativity.
You've also raised the idea before of digital colonialism, and I want to get into this concept now. What does that mean in the context of Pacific storytelling?
Yeah, to me, like digital colonialism really is this idea of like our data being the final frontier of colonialism, and this kind of acceleration of tech in the last kind of 5 to, I would say, 7 years, pushing forward to kind of like create a sense of urgency that Indigenous people must kind of like catch up with the like Western tech revolution. And that means like increasing digital literacy. It means like increasing AI literacy. Like it is really important for our people to be active digital citizens, and part of that requires us to have the technology, like access to the technology, and then the second part of that is to know how to use it. But I think it's also really important that we have the choice to engage or not with this technology. And in 2019 I was invited to be a speaker at the United Nations AI Summit.
Wow, cool.
Which is like I think it's an annual thing now, but I was there as a storyteller with another group of storytellers, and at the time I was kind of, I guess, like I was an advocate for Indigenous Pacific people being part of the design of how AI works. I was with a group of people that were, quite deep in the AI world, and using it to kind of like shape their practice. And I saw some crazy stuff. Like it was mind blowing, and it really made me realize there is so much out there in terms of technology and AI specifically that our people don't know about, even though we're engaging with it every day through things like like Google Maps and social media algorithms. And so I thought, you know what, like I feel like I need to go out there and advocate for our people to know about this stuff and to be active in the design of it. But in the last couple of years, especially working with youth as, like an educator in community, like Pacific communities, I've realized that actually, even though, yes, I agree, we should have access to the tech and have a choice on whether we engage with it or not, it's all kind of a distraction to me. And actually the urgency for Pacific storytelling is around embodied practice. And it's about our young people who are going to be our leaders one day, knowing who they are and where they're from, feeling confident in their bodies, feeling confident in their ancestry, and knowing that, they can walk into a room of their family or, their community and not feel shame or fear or like guilt about not knowing certain things about themselves. That for me is more important than this idea of like being online, being active digital citizens, because that is the future of our culture and the future of our stories. So yeah, I think digital colonialism really is this kind of like persistent agenda from the West to force us to buy this narrative that it matters and that AI matters and that we all
must use it.
Yeah, we all got to be on Gen AI, and like that's the greatest tool, but it's actually not, like, and we can choose to believe it or choose not to believe it. But also, like those technologies have a really big impact on our environment, and we are at the forefront of the climate crisis and experiencing it in real time. Just because we don't see the impact in our everyday lives doesn't mean it's not happening. And so, the irony of like us being target communities whilst also being the most vulnerable, I think is really important for our people to understand. And like one of the greatest things that our ancestors have given us is our memory. People talk a lot about like Pacific people being navigators, and like our ability to traverse the Pacific Ocean is like one of the greatest achievements of our ancestors. And like thank goodness to our Micronesian siblings who have like really held on to that knowledge for for, all of this time. But, that requires incredible knowledge and memory, like long-term memory, spatial memory, the ability to like locate yourselves through story, through place, through people, and the use of technology and being online and storing our memories, storing our knowledges, our languages, all of that online and disembodying it from ourselves is an active kind of like agenda of digital colonialism. And so for me, it's like the more I rely on that, I feel like the more I disrespect, one of the biggest gifts that my ancestors have given me. And so that's why I always encourage our young people to just, like be active and know about it, but know that, you don't have to engage with it if you don't want to. My hope is that, like our people are able to kind of find a way to work around that and not kind of like let that be the thing that drives or informs how we tell stories in our communities and how we pass them on. Because in my opinion, placing them online on a server, it's not the same. It's not the same as sitting in a room with family for like 5 to 7 hours with like 10 cups of tea.
Yeah.
And one of actually the most beautiful things about, like when I think about our Tokelauan culture is stories exist in many memories. And for example, like if I work on a project, I might go and ask a particular elder for knowledge around a story or a song or a kakai, like a myth or legend. And often they'll give me their version. They'll say, but I don't really, I'm not the expert. You should go and ask this person.
Right.
And then I'll go ask that person and they go, I mean, this is my version, but I think you should go
Maybe
and ask this person, And I think that's actually really beautiful because it shows, one, how we are like one, like massive organism that share and store the memories ourselves, but two, how everyone is like humble enough to acknowledge that people have different versions of the same story and they can coexist, and that's important, like it's not just like one homogenous kind of like narrative. And that's what I worry about, is that when our stories are stored online, not only do they become like disembodied, but also like there becomes like one homogenous narrative of like what is, one version of a story, or like one reflection or representation of a community that is kind of like etched into digital history forever. And for people who don't know anything about our communities or our stories, including our own young people who maybe are like disconnected from their families or cultures for, any reason, that becomes the authority on our story, So I think, it's important, powerful connector, powerful kind of like means to kind of archive, but really needs to be interrogated.
I also wanted to pivot again, Emele, and talk about with Studio Kiin, which is the Indigenous-led arts collective that you founded. The idea of healing through the creative process has come up before. Can you talk with me a bit about that?
So I went to NIDA, which for people who don't know anything about performing arts is the National Institute of Dramatic Arts. It's based in Bidjigal country. And I went through a very like traditional European kind of like conservatoire training. There was like 18 of us that got in, and we were like told that it's like very elite. When I graduated, I went straight into like working in mainstream theater and working in film and television, and I had some like pretty intense experiences that were kind of like career changing for me, because I experienced like bullying, and like racial discrimination. And for me, I was like, as an artist, a young emerging artist, having experienced that, I never wanted other artists to ever experience that in their lives. And so I decided that, I wanted to make things that feel good with my friends and people who have shared values, and also, realized through that process of making with people that I love and people that share my values, that actually you don't have to suffer in order to create great storytelling. And storytelling encourages you and kind of requires you to be vulnerable and courageous and be, like honest with yourselves, and to at times confront the parts of yourself that maybe you didn't know were kind of hiding, And I think in a lot of ways that's what artists kind of do is, you know, regardless of what your medium or form is that you kind of like push yourselves towards being able to have those conversations with bravery and vulnerability that maybe like everyday people don't have the opportunity to do or aren't quite ready to do. But I feel like and believe and have experienced, especially through Studio Kiin, that you can do that without re-traumatizing yourself or traumatizing other people. And the way that we curate spaces, the types of projects that we put together, the people that we bring in, like all of that is kind of like intentional around prioritizing what feels good for us. And also at the same time holding ourselves to a standard around the quality of the work that we produce. And part of that, what actually makes that possible is community, you know, like knowing that we're not doing it alone, that we have each other's backs. That was kind of a driver towards wanting to start the collective, and all of the work that we've done, you know, consistently for myself and also through other artists have come forward and be like, you know what, this is actually healed parts of me that I didn't realize were also really struggling, or had become burnt out, or, you know, I'd been hiding in a little corner somewhere. And that for me is like amazing. Like that's best case scenario, that it can empower people to feel confident in themselves and tell their stories. Yeah.
As an artist in a world that is full today of noise, what has silence given you or meant to you?
I'm not afraid of silence. I'm not afraid to like sit in a room and wait. Part of that is because, you know, that's the way that I was raised. So like in my cultures, people are comfortable with silence. Like I love that at the end of like a family gathering, or like a community gathering, like our leaders or our elders will say like, does anyone have anything to say? And we all just kind of like will sit in silence and wait until someone stands and says something, and then sits back down, and then we'll wait to see if someone else has something, you know. So like the way that I was raised was that we are comfortable to sit in silence. I feel the awkwardness sometimes.
We all do, yeah.
But I don't feel so moved by the awkwardness that I have to fill it by talking, you know, unnecessarily. So yeah, I think silence has been powerful for me because it encourages me to just kind of like be present and not rush myself or rush people or force things. I think also silence for me has been powerful because it's really kind of like made me a better listener. Some of my like favorite orators are also incredible listeners, and I think silence really does require you to be humble enough to know when it is time to talk and when it is time to kind of just listen. I know that, you know, historically it has been and can be weaponized against like marginalized communities. And so I'm aware that, you know, it's not necessarily for everybody, you know, like a positive thing to be silent. But for me personally, I feel like the way that I was raised and also the way that I practice silence has become a powerful tool for listening, for being confident in myself, and also like a tool for resistance. Like, I've seen that in so many kind of instances where like people have used silence to show that they are resistant to something. They will not engage in communication, and they will not engage in, you know, like emails or dialogue. That's their way of saying like, sorry, this is not for me, I'm not interested. And I think that's really powerful as well. Yeah.
When you imagine, Emele, the Indigenous oceanic storytelling of tomorrow, what excites you the most?
For a long time, you know, we have told stories in a very particular way. And part of that is because that's, you know, like how our practices have evolved. And part of that is because that's what, you know, funding bodies and arts organizations have rewarded and have said, yeah, that's what we love, you know, or that's what we know of as Pacific storytelling. And so when I see, you know, like artists who are really kind of like shifting and interrupting and challenging what our idea or perception of Pacific storytelling is, and being kind of unapologetic also about the questions that they're asking us to ask ourselves as Pacific people, like that's what's really exciting for me. Seeing people kind of like also push this notion of like traditional versus contemporary, that's a really big binary in the Pacific community. I don't see kind of like a line between like community arts practice and professional arts practice. I think the two are both really important and inform one another as a Pacific artist. And so I also feel like this line of like, this is traditional, Pacific arts and this is contemporary Pacific arts. I'm like, no, it's all relative and it all matters. And so when I see artists kind of like shifting, prodding, poking all of that, I'm like, yes, that's like really beautiful.
I think lastly, Emele, you've brought in an object from your
yeah.
creative life to share with us. Can you tell us what it is and why you've brought it in? What's the story behind it?
Yeah, so I have brought in this masi.
Wow. What is a masi?
So masi is masi kesa is a form of like cultural arts in Fiji.
Wow.
In other parts of the Pacific, it's called tapa or like siapo or hiapo. So we call it masi, and that's like the word used to kind of like refer to this here, which is made from like the bark of the mulberry tree.
Wow, mulberry tree.
And this was hand painted by my Yavu, who is Fijian. Her name is Natasha Rotuva.
Wow.
She comes from the island of Kandavu, and so she's my Yavu. So our provinces are historically like frenemies.
Okay.
So usually when when you meet someone who's your Yavu, like you have a very like fighting, joking relationship, and you can challenge your Yavu to do pretty much anything and they have to do it, and that can be like someone that you've known for years or someone that you've just met. That's kind of like how ancient and amazing and integral that kind of like kinship relationship is, but also like our kinship system in Fiji.
Yeah.
But Natasha and I are actually the opposite. We're like very good friends.
Oh, okay, that's lovely.
And very close. And so she's a visual artist. She's a nana. She's a mother, and she had an exhibition called Buninga, which is named after, it's like the Fijian word for our like hair styles.
Okay.
Like our version of like an afro hairstyle.
Okay.
In the like shape of a duck's tail, and she hand painted this work. Like she's hand painted all of her works. So this was part of her exhibition, which I supported as part of public programming. And afterwards, she gifted this to me, and it's actually the design is like after my curl pattern.
Oh, no way. Your own hair.
My own hair.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a love letter to you and your relationship with her. How beautiful.
Yeah, so this is really special to me, and she's one of our collective members of Studio Kiin as well. So for me, this work like represents like kinship that is thousands of years old. It also represents like sisterhood from our collective. And at the opening of our exhibition, we were able to kind of like facilitate the bringing together of our Fijian community in Wairarapa and also Mana Whenua. And I had my I think at the time he was like my 1-year-old baby, and my husband was in Fiji, so our sister Maka was there and our brother Samu to help look after my baby. So there's so much kind of like community and love and friendship that this represents for me when I look at it.
That is so beautiful. Thank you so much for coming in today, Emele.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real treat. And I just appreciate the thoughtfulness and generosity of our Talanoa.
That was Emele Ugavule, and I'm André Chomko. You can find more episodes of Articulate on YouTube, Spotify, or at thepost.co.nz/articulate. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.